What's going on, it's the Polygon Don, and today I'm here to talk about another 5 hidden gems for the PS4. The games featured in the last video from this series was quite heavy on RPG mechanics, whereas this one you could argue leans a lot more into atmosphere. All are great in my opinion and worthy of your consideration, so without further ado, let's dive in and have a look.
In the midst of our tribulation, like a gift from heaven, the Penrose appeared. An object of untold technological abundance that advanced civilization on all frontiers. Hunger and disease eradicated, energy mastered, and mortality conquered.
Beautiful Desolation is an isometric point-and-click adventure game set in a post-apocalyptic version of 1980s South Africa. After an alien ship dubbed locally as the Penrose lands on Earth, its arrival marks a significant shift in civilization's advancement, with the technological and social upheaval radically transforming the status quo. It also marked a significantly darker moment for the game's main protagonist, Mark Leslie. The arrival of the Penrose caused a tragic accident in Mark's life, and left reeling and angry with more questions than the government is giving him answers to, he is joined by his brother Don as they decide to take matters into their own hands. They attempt to infiltrate the heavily guarded spaceship looking for answers or some kind of meaning to all this madness. They manage it too, and once there they get acquainted with Pooch, a dog-like security robot who's there to foil their plans. Only the Penrose itself has other ideas and sends all three into the distant future. Figuring out what the hell is going on, and more importantly how to get back to their own timeline, you'll be helping the brothers Leslie and their robot dog companion achieve this through solving puzzles, meeting new NPCs and settling disputes, etc. All while collecting technology with the hope of eventually returning them to their world. After the Penrose's security systems send the brothers to a future version of Earth, what they find is a planet so alien looking it's hard to believe it's the same place. AI technology has run rampant and is now the dominating factor. The literal apocalypse had happened in the time the brothers travelled through, and they clearly got a lot more than they bargained for from their little undercover Mission Impossible. Player choice obviously is at the forefront here and is included in almost all interactions, directly feeding into what ending you will see, and feels like the decisions you make have a genuine impact on the story moving forward. The dialogue between characters and NPCs is well written and thought-provoking too, providing and enhancing the already incredible world building. I really felt transported with this one. I don't know if it was the South African angle, as I don't think I've ever played a game set there or with characters from there, or if it was the gorgeous art style, but something was really drawing me into this world, and I felt that constant sense of immersion throughout my time with it. Gameplay wise, there's a ton of fetch quests and lots of backtracking, which is quite synonymous with games from this genre, but as visually striking as some of the areas within the game are, after the 15th time walking through it, it does start to lose its appeal, so a faster run button would have been nice. Especially as there are no quest markers, a lot of this game is figuring out things for yourself, and the game does very little in the way of hand-holding. This I don't necessarily mind, and I quite like the respect and responsibility that gives the player, but I don't know, I'm not sure if it's the pre-rendered backgrounds or a UI decision, but on more than a few occasions I was left completely stumped on what to do and where to go next, purely because an item I needed to pick up was so well hidden I just kept walking past it without noticing. The detection box around my character was so small that I needed to be right on top of it for the pickup prompt to trigger, which led to even more endless and fruitless backtracking before I gave in and looked up a guide. So I'll say this, the moment you start to feel frustrated or lost, just look up a guide and don't feel bad about it. That probably makes me sound like I'm down on the game, which I'm definitely not. It's an incredible point-and-click adventure and well worth playing. I just wanted to give a heads up on the more finicky parts so that you guys can set your expectations. Frustrating puzzle and UI decisions aside, the game's story is very captivating. The world it's set in is otherworldly and unfamiliar, and getting to know its various characters and beings that inhabit it was genuinely enjoyable.
Ah, a fresh face with virgin eyes falls upon me.
Fans of the genre will get a massive kick out of its characters and world design, whereas those of you out there with a penchant for sci-fi will find an excellent and captivating story well worth diving into. And here we have Signalis, or Signalis, a third-person survival horror game with sci-fi and anime inspirations that completely gripped me from start to finish. Very much borrowing more than a few key gameplay elements from classic Resident Evil games like the fixed camera angles and inventory management and save rooms, etc. It also manages to capture the atmosphere and sheer dread of exploring a new area that old-school Resi and Silent Hill were so good at, only this time with a pixelated art style that is inspired, stunning and immensely captivating. With its confident sense of visual identity along with its combination of anime, sci-fi and horror, it was an immediate draw for me when I first saw its trailer. Not necessarily the horror element, as anyone familiar with my channel will know that I don't tend to talk about games from that genre all that often, but sci-fi or cosmic horror is something that usually gets my attention instantly, and with presentation as stylish and considered as Signalis, I decided to take a gamble and pre-ordered the physical release of the game. And there isn't an ounce of regret in my bones over that decision. The sense of intrigue is evident and substantial from its opening introduction, and exploring the oppressive cold corridors of Signalis' 2.5D pixelated world never got tiresome. It always managed to maintain a strong sense of discovery through its roughly 15-hour campaign that I was thrilled to journey through, even when things got dark, weird and gross. A humanoid replica unit known as Elster and her human commander Ariane are on board a scout shuttle for colonization when it crash lands on an unknown planet. After a short cutscene, you as the player controlling Elster are told to remember our promise and wake up, before Elster then finds herself in the Sierpinski mining facility on the planet Leng. Elster quickly realizes that the human commanders are all dead and the replica workforce have gone rogue, setting the scene for some mind-bending cosmic horror that will shortly follow. Replicas use copied neural imprints from humans and as a result can at times inherit various idiosyncrasies from them, such as a compulsive desire to listen to music or even to bathe. Failure to indulge in these activities can cause the replicas to destabilize. The human commanders, called Gestalts, are there to manage them and keep them on the straight and narrow, but with all of them now dead, the crazy replicas are left unchecked and have now descended fully into their madness, becoming something altogether more terrifying and otherworldly, attacking Elster on sight. Desperate to find out how she got there and where the Gestalts she crash landed with are, you'll set out exploring the facility, collecting whatever supplies you come across, solving brilliantly designed puzzles and gathering clues, slowly piecing together the biggest puzzle of them all being the game's plot. That's the setup anyway, and I won't be going any further into it so as to avoid spoilers, but man, what a trip this game is. Gameplay consists of a third-person shooter elements mixed with resource management and puzzle solving. Elster can only carry a maximum of 6 items at any given point, which includes her main weapon, ammo and key items used for puzzle solving, so figuring out what to take with you from a save room often felt like a puzzle unto itself. You'll be making lots of return trips to your nearest save room, dipping in and out of your storage box while you figure out the correct combination of items required to progress whilst retaining some crucial items needed to survive. A few of you may find this tedious, but the level design was so well considered, with shortcuts and elevators being unlocked as you progress, and the areas themselves never feeling that dauntingly large, that going back and forth between areas was never really an issue for me. What also helped was the clear and instantly comprehensible map design. Blue doors are open, red doors are forever locked, and yellow doors can be opened but aren't yet. It's simple and to the point, and I've very much approved. I've been meaning to cover this game for a while now and almost didn't include it in this particular video as I feel like it might not qualify as hidden anymore. Word of mouth is spreading and more people are experiencing this brilliant little indie title, but even with a modest cult following that the game currently has, I feel that, as of recording at least, way more people still need to know about and play this game. The pixelated anime cutscenes were brilliant and the low poly PS1 first person segments were incredibly haunting, as were the Silent Hill-inspired designs of the game's horrifying enemies and bosses. The breadcrumbs of lore that are placed in items you find throughout the world slowly piece together this complex Lovecraftian narrative that will likely cause you to have an existential crisis, and is a game that I personally won't be forgetting anytime soon. It's easily one of the best titles I've played this year, and something I highly recommend to anyone with an interest in sci-fi or horror. Next up we have Fairy Tail, which is set in a world where a select few people have the ability to use magic. Some of these magic users form guilds and practically becoming bounty hunters in the process, and they take on tasks set to them by the citizens of the regions they represent. There are other guilds also, and this is where friction can occur between them. Now, just to preface this with my own background regarding Fairy Tail, prior to playing this I just saw a handful of episodes, and even those I can barely remember, so I pretty much went into this game with next to zero knowledge of the world or its characters. And since the game's story picks up after the Tenru Island arc, which is around episode 120-ish I think, you might assume that being a fan with knowledge of the lore and the events leading up to the start of the game are essential in making sense of it all. But I can assure you that isn't the case. While yes, of course, those of you out there familiar with the series as a whole will definitely get more out of playing this than I did, or those out there like me, it really isn't compulsory. The game does a really good job of introducing you to the world and each character, and it mainly focuses on Natsu and Lucy, but there are many more of them, and most being playable too. Honestly, I can't remember the last time I played a JRPG with this many playable characters to choose from. It's great, with their personality, design and animations being some of the strongest elements of the game in general. Presentation on the whole is great, character models are well animated and seemingly true to their anime and manga origins, with their in-game battle animations being energetic and on point, especially with the swirling camera angles when magic abilities are engaged. Combat is presented as turn-based and relies on a 3x3 grid system where you can reposition enemies with knockback attacks, for example, redeploying them to a formation better suited to the attacks of your party members. It's not the most in-depth battle system I've played in a JRPG, but it's more than adequate for what it's trying to achieve, and the grid-based nature of the battle arenas make for some strategic thinking, especially with the harder and more plentiful enemies you'll encounter later on in the game. There's requests you can take on directly from the request board within your guild. With these you can increase your renown, gather items and level up your characters. Being that you start the game with your guild HQ and guild name in tatters, part of the overarching aim is to bring that all back up to standard, improving the facilities within the guild like the item shop and the laboratory etc, as well as the renown of your guild's name, Fairy Tail. Developed by Gust, I was going into this with a certain expectation of quality, and I'm pleased to say that I wasn't disappointed. Their flair and understanding of the genre is clearly present, even if there isn't anything new or out of the ordinary waiting to light the world on fire. It's just a competent JRPG that was enjoyable to lose myself in for the 20 to 25 hours or so I spent with it. I think if you're a fan of the show, then the chances are you've already heard of this game, if not played it already. But on the off chance you haven't, you really should consider giving this a look. I think you'll be more than pleasantly surprised. And for those of you out there like me with no affiliation with the show or manga and are hungry for a new turn-based RPG, or thirsty as this game often is, then you could do a lot worse than Fairy Tail. here we have Zero Strain, an incredibly fast-paced and dazzling arcade shooter that manages to carve out its own unique place in a genre that's almost as old as gaming itself. Unlike any that I have played before, this shoot 'em up, or shmup as some like to call them, is a gorgeously chromatic and neon-drenched game that is just as likely to hypnotise as it is to overwhelm. At first at least. That is until you manage to overcome and master its uncommon and very particular control setup. Set in a series of futuristic top-down arenas where strategic use of offense and defense are critical to surviving, you will pilot ships, or in this game's case catalysts, to defeat the array of enemies that present themselves. This game is challenging, at least it was for me, mainly due to it not technically being a twin-stick shooter even though it looks like it should be. Wrapping my head around that fact is probably what took me so long to get to grips with and in turn appreciate this incredible little game. Now, I'm not an arcade shooter buff or anything like that, but I have played a fair share and I would definitely consider myself a fan of the genre, but this honestly doesn't play like any that I have come across before. You start off with just one catalyst, and as you progress and defeat bosses, this in turn allows you to construct new catalysts, all of them playing very differently, with each having 3 weapons to use as well as a passive ability like shield protection, etc. The stages themselves vary too. Some will be on a singular plane, with wave after wave of enemy encounters. Others will be a literal level system where once the enemies have been dispatched, the floor itself will shatter and you will fall down to the next level, getting lower and lower as enemies increase in difficulty. And there's also some tower defense style stages that require you to not only keep your ship intact, but also protect a base that is constantly under bombardment by enemy projectiles. There's boss battles too, which depend upon you reading their telegraphed attacks, attacking only when it's safe and wise to do so, and these were some of my favourite parts of the game. The devs have done a great job of keeping things fresh with each stage. It's not just more shooting but with harder enemies. I mean, it is that too, but I do appreciate how they almost add a new gimmick each time to keep it engaging. Naturally, as a result, there was bound to be some that stick the landing more than others, at least on a personal level. I'm not a huge tower defense guy, so I didn't care much for those levels, probably because I found them the most difficult, but the boss fights were great fun, as were the frenzied battles that I had where my sole focus was just destroy all others, keep self alive. Shooting is done by holding down the square button and targets are almost locked on to whichever direction you're facing. Defeated enemies drop energy cells and they power up your other more deadly attack abilities. These are triggered by holding down L2 while simultaneously pressing a face button and are great to save for the more difficult enemies that will inevitably come. R2 is a boost that can safely traverse you through enemy fire or lasers and can even be held down to allow you to scoop up any large and spread out caches of energy. All this action meanwhile is building up another meter for something called a synchro burst. This, when activated, is pretty much like setting off a bomb that clears all enemies on screen in a glorious display of neon light and destruction. Looks wise, this game is very pretty. It's almost like they've taken the essence of 80s sci-fi shooters and given it a 4K glossy coat of paint. Published by East Asia Soft and possibly still available on their site PlayAsia, this unique arcade shooter is difficult but not cheap in its design, and will require you to work in order to see its rewards, but if you're a fan of the genre, you'll find a lot to appreciate in this game, and might be one to pick up next time you see it.
Please, we have nothing to give you. I do not wish to fight.
I have an artifact, old man.
No, Grandpa, don't do it.
We are not Corwins, child. This is the only law, and we must obey it. Let's get it over with, stranger.
And last up we have Clash Artifacts of Chaos, and I'm not even sure where to begin with this game. I mean, look at this guy, and he's the hero. I mean, the art style is like nothing I've ever seen before, completely and utterly repulsive, yet at the same time wonderful, fantastical and unique. Trippy landscapes and otherworldly abominations are drawn in an almost comic book fashion, with such hideous little details that I simply couldn't look away or stop exploring. Essentially, Clash Artifacts of Chaos is a third-person semi-open world action RPG, with an emphasis on martial arts, and if you've played the recent God of War games, you'll feel right at home with its close, over-the-shoulder camera and weighty melee combat. Set in the completely foreign and alien world of Xenozoic, you'll play the game as Pseudo, a recluse who has been going about his business on his own just fine until one day he finds a young bird-like creature known only as the Boy, whose grandfather and protector has been killed in a dispute. See, in this world, disputes or disagreements are settled by a game of dice called the Ritual, which at first glance might resemble something like Yahtzee, but is actually a whole lot more intriguing. When you encounter enemies out in the world, you can challenge them to the Ritual. Here, you and your opponent will choose a so-called artifact of chaos that comes with either buffs or debuffs and won't actually affect the ritual game itself, but rather the physical battle that will follow it, depending on who wins. The whole point of the ritual from a gameplay perspective is to provide either an advantage or a disadvantage to the player during the melee battle that will follow. One artifact that I had that I really liked using was, should I win the ritual, my opponent will be continuously stung by wasps if he ever stopped moving during our combat encounter. It was great. And during the ritual itself, you essentially roll dice, and with the help of checks, moves or actions with varying abilities, you try and whittle down your opponent's overall score. The player with the highest accumulated number at the end, once all the checks have been used, is the winner. The boy's grandfather was killed as a result of this type of ritual, and our playable protagonist Pseudo takes it upon himself to look after the boy until he can look after himself. Soon it becomes clear that the boy is actually being hunted down by the game's main baddie, Gemini, as the boy possesses some relatively unique and desirable powers that the villain wishes to use for her own nefarious needs. The main story itself may lack some originality, yes, but that's not to say I wasn't completely engrossed overall. The protagonist, who I thought was voiced by Josh Brolin when I first heard him speak, was incredibly likeable and strangely relatable, thanks in part to the great writing and the vocal delivery from the voice actor. And that was pretty much across the board with all the NPCs you come across. Every one of these freakish beings felt like they were genuinely part of this hallucinatory landscape. You can see a lot of love went into creating this title to ensure its creative vision was realised and that immersion was high on the list. It really shows too. Apparently this is a third game in the Xenozoic universe, the first two entries being PC only games, but having no prior experience with the titles before playing this, I didn't notice anything out of the ordinary, and by all accounts is a great place to start if you wanted to dive into this truly mad world. Combat has a heft to it that I really like, and with it being an RPG, you can tailor it to your own playstyle to a certain degree. There's not 1,000,001 different stats you can min-max here, but there is enough to keep it interesting. There's different fighting stances that, as well as moves and combos, can all be upgraded and provide quite a mixed bag of martial art techniques. Beat some opponents around enough and a special mode will be triggered where you can pummel the enemy in a first-person brawl, which was hilarious when I first experienced it, and to be honest never got old and always felt very satisfying. I bought this game on a whim, mainly because of the ridiculous looking character models on the front cover, and when I found out it was an action RPG that borrowed some Souls-like elements, I was hoping for an okay game with some unconventional artwork. What I got was one of the most incredible and memorable gaming experiences I've had all year. It's like Terry Pratchett took a big bag of shrooms with a FromSoft gameplay designer, and the resulting game their tripped out minds created is something that you actually get to experience for yourselves and likely never forget. Don't sleep on this one, it's absurdly brilliant.
This is outrageous! I'm furious! Too easy.
Okay guys, and there you have another 5 hidden gems for the PS4. The next few videos will likely feature a different console. I'm currently working on some PS5 and PS3 content as well as some general multi-platform videos, but to be honest it probably won't be long until I'm back talking about PS4 games, as there's just so many incredible ones to talk about. So subscribe if any of that sounds like it might be your thing. But for now though, I bid adieu, so take care, be good and game on.